together about 6 years. I'm not sure exactly, but it was, I think, June of 2015. I don't know, something like that. But so I'm Angie Morrill, and I live in Portland. I am the director of the Indian Ed program for Portland Public Schools, and a part of this collective. So I went to grad school with Thea at UCSD, and that's how we met. And actually, that's how I met Christina and Sam as well. And so I'll let them talk.
Does that mean I go next?
Yeah. I think that's you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Christina Rhee. I should rename myself. I go by C. Rhee for artist work. And I am one of the 3 haunts in the Super Futures Haunt Qollective. I have an avatar named Agent O. I'm also the program manager at the San Diego Asian Film Festival, and originally hailed from Oakland, Bay Area. Glad to be here.
Hi everybody, I'm Sam Jung. I go by Sam Jung as my artist name. I'm formerly based in California, and now I'm in New York, where I work for the city of New York on economic development policy work. I'm also SFAOW in this awesome trio of haunts, and yeah, I met these lovely folks while I was an undergrad at UC San Diego, and really rooted our kind of artistship in a lot of struggle that was happening at the time and a lot of love. So nice to be here.
And I'm going to actually go ahead and pull up the screen for a little bit so folks who haven't had the chance to see your work can begin to enjoy it. Not like your faces are not also enjoyable, but you know, both ends. So that is you on the left. On the right is actually another artist. Oops. And here.
Do they know that this is a show that you curated in
no,
Seattle Alice Gallery? Why don't we mention?
Okay, fine. Yes. So I had the opportunity of bringing Super Futures Haunt Qollective to a space that no longer exists, but it was a curatorial collective, and we ran a gallery in Georgetown called the Alice. And so when I was a member there, I hosted Super Futures and several other artists whose work I thought was really poetic and really powerful in speaking to how folks creatively push back and resist against colonialism, white supremacy, environmental harm, other kinds of spatial and racial and social damage with narratives that are more than just about repeating the trauma. So yeah, they were not the main artists, but you know, extra special fancy ones, Super Futures. And yeah, here is the haunting that you did closer to home, because you said you started in California, but this actually is from, the Pacific Northwest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Pacific City, Cape Kiwanda.
And I was wondering if, maybe we can begin just by talking about like what brought you together. You said you met in San Diego, and, why did you decide at that time when you were in SD, right, that something needed to happen in terms of you all coming together and collaborating to do these hauntings or these visitations?
So Sam brought us together. So I'm going to ask him to answer this question, because we,
like what was happening at the time, right? Was this the same time as student protests and all those things were happening, or was that after?
Yeah, Black Winter, the Compton Cookout. I think that's when I met Sam. I knew who Sam was because he was such an awesome special undergrad, and I just thought he was so cool. And the first time he came over to my house, I like ran around my apartment being like, Sam Jack's coming over, Sam Jack's coming over. And I met Ree because she was the partner of one of my favorite professors who ended up being my dissertation chair and such a dear friend. But we, you know, quickly, you know, established our own friendship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, I guess I'll start where Angie left off. And I was a student organizer during an intense period of time in my undergraduate career where there was a series of anti-Black racist incidents that happened on our campus. It was part of a really solid crew of student organizers and faculty and grad students that mobilized to shut the campus down to demand action for racial justice. That's where I met Angie and was a special guest in her home where she made some of the best mac and cheese I've ever had in my life, and where we were in deep fellowship, not only with each other, but with this solid crew of folks that I mentioned before. At the same time, I was enrolled in Ree's partners class, and the final exhibition project was an art gallery. And so I took that opportunity to create a large-scale graphite drawing of drag queens and really activated this notion of like third space and projected images that were classically classically represented heteropatriarchy. And I just remember Ree being the first adult in my life to seriously consider me an artist. And so I knew from that point on that I would just love both of these women. And we actually kept in contact for a couple of years after I graduated. And then while I was in San Diego, I think a couple of years after leaving, I was in town. Ree and Wayne were hosting me, and Ree at the time was coordinating drive-through theater. I might be getting the name wrong. It was like this awesome idea, she can elaborate on it, but where films were screened on a mobile truck. And yeah, had just thought of wanting to reconnect with these two incredible women, and just knew from like a deeply spiritual place almost that we needed to collaborate in some way, shape, or form. And before we had met up, we were helping Ree on her master's show, and I was introduced to Agent O then. So maybe I can pass the baton to Ree to explain who that is, but was deeply inspired by Agent O and this kind of way in which we could reckon with violence through art, and just felt that like each of us had such an embodied and theoretical and love-based kind of method that we were beginning to explore that would reckon with these legacies of violence. So we wanted to create some creative outlet for it. So I don't know, Agent O, Ree, if you want to give that origin stories.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I think our origin story is really awesome. I feel like it's a great roadmap for anyone, because I think the three of us feel like if we had not formed this collective, you know, we may not have persisted as artists as we have now. Because I feel like, and maybe everyone relates to this, once you leave school, it's really hard to keep continuing creating without a teacher that's sort of keeping you accountable. And so there's strength in accountability to people you love. I often describe like how we made a collective as sort of forming a garage band, like kind of like a punk rock garage band, except not a garage band. Actually, it's more like you have some buddies and you want to form a karaoke band. Like, you want to just be like, hey, I like you, we like each other. Let's form a karaoke band. And then on top of that, let's give our karaoke band a name. And I think there's power in naming ourselves. And so these sort of magic ceremonial rites of identifying and recognizing each other, and then naming each other, and not needing some sort of serious purpose, just knowing that we enjoy each other's company and we enjoy karaoke, or we enjoy art, or we enjoy going to fancy hotels. that's sort of our origin story. I think Sam put the bat sign in the sky, and we love Sam and trust his connection with like a larger spirit. And so we said, yes, we're going to answer this call. There's a power in a collective. I think Angie said this before, like being in a collective has saved her life. It saved my life. It's kind of preserved a part of our soul that needed to be preserved. And, you know, even long before Thea curated us into a show, we were just doing things for fun for each other. We'd go to different places and haunt and take pictures. And I think there's something about being, you know, artists of color, women, queer, you need that, especially in an art space that's largely not, because our ability to do that seems always, you know, threatened. So Agent O, who Sam Jung mentioned, was an avatar I created in grad school, and she was inspired by psychics, by Japanese horror, by architecture, and she would haunt modernist spaces by leaking through the ceiling in drips. You know, the drips that everyone sees and those suspended ceilings. You look up, I challenge you, go to Albertsons, go to Target, go anywhere that seems like an institution, and you look up and you'll see that same suspended ceiling, and I guarantee you'll find a leak. And so there was this idea of this leak that's always amongst us, that's actually a sign of things at our foundation actually being sort of rotten. And so Agent O embodied that rot and came and haunted, and also would destroy ceilings when no one was looking. So Angie and Sam were like pivotal to the birth of Agent O, which is why it makes sense that Agent O is also only able to continue because of the Super Futures Haunt Collective.
Thank you all for that. And, you know, just hearing you all talk, I remember the first time I encountered your work, or maybe I was talking to Angie, I don't remember anymore, but there was, someone said, or you all wrote, that you said yes to each other. And so hearing it again in the way that you have all kind of shared in this way is just really powerful, right? And what does saying yes look like, and how can saying yes produce some, not just really beautiful images, right? But also like sustain these relationships across time and space. And so I was gonna pull up, again, this slideshow, I'm gonna be kind of jumping in and out of it. If I can ask a little bit about maybe some of the origin or any kind of story you wanna share about some of these visitations, right? to speak to, again, how you work collaboratively, or how some of these pieces came about, just, or, you know, what was happening when you all did it. I mean, anything you wanted to kind of give in terms of the context of some of these works. So let's see, keynotes. And the text, for folks that just came in, is taken from the Prezi, which is this incredible slideshow, that's more than a slideshow, article that Angie Morrill, Eve Tuck, another Indigenous scholar, and Super Futures Haunt Collective all collaboratively wrote, called Before Dispossession, or Surviving It. So maybe I'm really curious to hear about this piece. One, I love that you all found this television for the show at the Alice, because it's such the perfect weird television. So even just structurally how this came together, and then, you know, the video itself, which I'll just play a snippet of really quickly for folks that haven't seen it, that you actually recorded together, that went onto the television. Okay.
I think one of the cool things about Agent O, and how Agent O, I mean, Agent O is our origin. I mean, Sam brought the band together, but Agent O was this incredibly creative, weird monster thing. that that we riffed on. And so we're ghosts. But I wouldn't necessarily define, like one of the cool things about Agent O is that they, or whatever it is, isn't gendered, isn't, I wouldn't try to define it, or, you know, although I would say it is monstrous. Like, and that is as not, and that's not in any type of ownership, is something that is also in relationship to Agent O as Lady Howe. But I do gender myself because I'm a different kind of thing. And I might be slightly less monstrous, but I still come from a place that's not here. You know, I'm like kind of a cousin or auntie of Agent O.
Okay.
I think, I mean, who knows? But I do think that it's not something that we even spend a lot of time defining, although we do sort of understand some of our archetypes, like SFAOW is the sexy one.
I mean, there was the other image from Before Dispossession of you on that Coney Island beach. It is fantastic.
Well, and the roses all over SFAOW. I mean, obviously that's some kind of speculative afterglow, right? I mean, that's what I take away from that. But that doesn't mean that that's something that was decided. Like, we all come to it with our own ideas about necessarily like what we're doing, and we don't necessarily come to consensus.
Yeah.
But we do have what we call visitations. We do emerge from a specularity and return there. And I would say especially SFAOW inhabits a kind of fugitivity. It's in their name. So we have a lot of, I mean, almost like Harry Potter, but not really at all like Harry Potter. We have a world that, but it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily something we all agree upon what that looks like. And so that TV, that was all preamble for the TV.
All the TV, here we go.
When we emerge, sometimes we bring shit with us. And that happens to be a TV from the bicentennial, you know, 1976, recalling 1776. And, you know, it's a celebration of the Declaration of Independence. And even though we're ghosts, we have opinions about colonialism. We're against it for the most part. You know, it's just, we like to have a sense of humor because we are always referencing violence, death, hard things. So
we also think of the TV sometimes like a time machine, because what you have is a really, really old TV that's referencing an even older moment in time. And on top of that, we have what's now considered an outdated iPad.
I know, mine won't update anymore. I can't get any Netflix on that generation iPad.
And that iPad is just sort of unceremoniously like stuck onto the TV. So it's kind of these weird layers. And then on top of that, that TV has an antenna, so it can receive transmissions. It's also portable, so it can move around. I think in our performance at Alice Gallery, we did move around with it. And what you see in front is actually a residue from that performance where gifts were dropping out of Lady Howe's skirt. And so we did place that in front of the TV.
And in the performance, or I'm sorry, not performance, in the visitation that you actually did of this space of the Belknap Hot Springs, right? I mean, I love the video because it's nonsensical and also completely makes sense as someone who was not there about what's happening in terms of you all. Just when I look at it as, right, a viewer of you three just coming together in this place of pleasure and joy, right? That folks of color are usually, like, I have really strange experiences always at saunas or hot springs in the body that I have. And you all have literally taken it over, right? And done something else and made it into another kind of place. And I feel like that is what visitation do.
I mean, it's definitely a ceremony, like, you know, but it's also clumsy. And yeah, there are people like who just swim by at different points, like whatever. It was fun.
Whoop. And so there's a couple, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around. So if I am, just stop me and talk about whatever you want instead, because your work always makes me think of like 30 million things at once. So you talked about being avatars, right? And you've also talked about being future ghosts. And I'm really curious, and I'm sure other folks are too, about what's up with a future ghost, right? Because you're not born yet, but you're already dead. Like, how does this work with time travel? I think this goes back to my general confusion, like with things like Back to the Future. Like, how do you all think of yourself in relation to time, and also in relation to like, yeah, this place now, which is, right, built on genocide and white supremacy and anti-Asian violence and all of these things.
Yeah, I think that it's open to interpretation, which, you know, as a graduate student or even as an undergraduate student, you're always being asked to define and name and be an expert on things. And I feel like that is not radical, right? That's not decolonial. That is, it's what the academy requires for you to succeed. And so there is some resistance, you know, in writing a piece that's so, that's collaborative, that is often, you know, jumping from one thing to another, a film, a thought, a dream, Andy Warhol, you know, Fred Moten, like I guess kind of like embrace and try to make a space for that chaos to exist without completely encircling it or nailing it down or limiting it, right? So when I think about the future, as far as the Super Futures Haunt Collective, you know, we are always engaged with the idea of time machines. All of our work is, when we date it for the shows that we've been in, you know, we always date it 100 years ahead. And yet when you see this, it's like year zero. So it can be confusing, but there's, you know, there's a thought behind it. When I was looking at this piece before dispossession, I was thinking about, you know, how relevant that it is to the current pandemic time, like the future without our loved ones or even us. And I've been thinking, you know, I think that's a lot of the grief that I feel that is my own, but also this sort of collective grief that's going on, the mourning, you know, and even that we're having, I feel like there's a lot of ghosts, you know, there's, you know, bodies outside of hospitals in trucks that nobody can deal with. It's just, there's and then there's this callous government that is telling us and showing us how much we don't matter. And in this piece, we're talking about mattering is actually is so key to I don't know. We say that's what's sort of at the, I don't know, maybe at the core of survivance, or you know, is this idea of mattering, and yet we're really in this moment where this callousness is like there's not even an attempt to hide it. You know, it's like, let's just deport some children. We don't give a fuck about people, some people. So I don't know, I feel like when I think about the future and this idea of the Super Futures Haunt Collective and stuff, I think that, you know, that it's essentially decolonial. Like for me, as an Indigenous woman, as a Native woman, like for me, that is kind of the core, because it's, to me, in the decolonial, where we don't know what the future looks like, and actually, we don't even know what the past looks like. Fred Moten says that thing about like, that resistance is before, and it was before colonialism. Resistance is before the attack. And so were the Indigenous people here resisting before contact? The answer, Fred Moten would say, is yes. And I would completely agree with that idea, that that we can be, that being and again, I guess I don't know the name for it, but being in some way decolonial, or living in possibility, not being cruel, does put you in a space where you are already resistance, even though you're not resisting necessarily. Anyway, that was so confusing.
I remember when we were making our first road trip to the fancy hotel, Sam Jung mentioned Saidiya Hartman's idea of dust. Do you remember that, Sam Jung?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I feel like that has some connection to Thea's question about future ghosts and ghosts living amongst us, and all this kind of mishmash of time that Super Futures is often dwelling in. And that mishmash of time we sometimes call a specularity. But one of the ideas is how we are living amongst ghosts, and those ghosts are, there's this idea that the history is in the past, it's over and done with. And I think plenty of people have challenged that and said, actually, we're living with it now, which also means we're living with our future now. It's all coexisting. And I think that's one of the areas that Super Futures plays with, in messing with our timestamp, and the specularity, but also just calling attention to how the past and the future are always coexisting in the now.
Yeah, and I think what strikes me about our methodology is that it's deeply relational. And so where we are obviously disrupting colonial time and saying that there's no distinct past that is a past and no future that is solely ahead of us, we're saying, no, it's dynamic. Our futures are current, our past, and they continue to seep into each other in different ways. And also our relations like continue to shape our past, present, and future. And so I think one of our interventions as an art collective is to say that we matter, as Angie was saying, that relations that have been foreclosed or disavowed for a lot of our people, we are making an intentional effort to cultivate that and to show up with a lot of love. And also as future ghosts, we carry whoever our ancestors are and will be into all the spaces and times that we visit.
And yeah, I mean, before I open it up for other folks to add questions and add to the conversation, I think that's one thing that's really struck me about all of your work, from, the more photo-based pieces like this, which is a gorgeous portrait of all of your families in the specularity and outside of the specularity, to some of your live visitations, which I was really happy that you were able to have one at the Alice, is the way that you're modeling, right, a different way of being together, right? How do I put this? I mean, I've really been trying to think through for a long time in my own scholarship around what does it mean specifically as, right, an Asian American person to be living on occupied land, to have a particular relationship to place and to histories of colonialism, violence. I mean, my family's from the Philippines, right? And there is that manifest destiny, colonial imagination that has really ravaged our island, similarly, but not the same as what has happened in the continental US. But I think for me, watching you all and experiencing your work, even if it's not providing any set answers or like a guide of this is how to do it, right? It's nothing that prescriptive. I do think that the questions that you ask in Before Dispossession, or again, even just the way that you take up space in these visitations, helps me think through these questions of, again, what does it mean to be an ethical relation, right? And recognize that for Asian American folks, we do carry histories of violence and also histories of complicity, right? With settler colonialism, and how can we, right, try and model ethical ways of being together. So I don't know, that wasn't a question, it was just more my thoughts. Although if you had any nuggets of wisdom around Asian American and Indigenous solidarity, I'm sure we would all take them.
I kind of think that question exists because it's not clear, where the connection is, we're not the only Asian American Indigenous collaborators, but it's not it's not like a natural, thing, but it also isn't, it's not hard. I don't think collaboration's ever easy, but I do think that it does demand, like Sam was talking about, the work being really relational. I wouldn't just, I guess, an openness, we have definitely, we talk about saying yes, but we've definitely told each other no as well. In fact, one of the things we've been working on, we're going to write into it some conflict because we think it's funny, we like to amuse ourselves, and I wouldn't want anyone to think it's all like rainbows and kittens all the time. These people are impossible. And
speak for yourself.
Angie's a grouchy one, always.
Always. DIVA.
I would definitely say, though, if anyone ever asks you to be in an art collective, say yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty freaking cool.
Thea, I think you asked, or you suggest, kind of one of those question marks that Super Futures brings up. Like, why are we together, and how does that make sense? And I think we're trying to figure that out too. But I think that one of the interesting things we suggest is that our work is not about identity, really, and it really is about relationships, and it really is about the relationship between the three of us and our relationships. So that would be my best kind of beginning of how to think through some of that, some of the entanglements that you're notioning towards.
Yeah. Before I open it up, because I see that Sandra has a question in the Q&A, I wanted to just share a short clip of the visitation that you did at the Alice, and it is based on the postcard, the conversation that's printed on the back of the postcard. And I won't say too much except that it is meant as a staged, right? The dialogue that we're hearing is a staged conversation between Fanny Ball, who's an ancestor of Lady Howe's, with Princess Angeline, or Kiki So Blue, right? The daughter of Chief Seattle, who refused to leave Seattle when the Duwamish were forcibly removed. So I'm going to just play a little bit of that clip, and then we'll open it up for conversation. Oops. Oh, it got cut off. All right, that's as good as him as any when Agent O is pulling something out of your butt.
That's right.
The time for it to cut out. I'm gonna stop.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, folks, sort of unceremoniously, but if you want to turn on your video so they can say hi to you directly and we can just open it up for a conversation for questions of you all, that would be amazing. I am recording it, but your names are not going to be shown. So, there's one. Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Hello. You have a UCSD connection too.
Yeah, so I did my UCSD undergrad in I have music playing, in literature writing and critical gender studies. I was there, I think, from 2012 to 2016, and so I kind of just missed paths with you all. I think I'm not sure, but yes.
But I'm sure we had some of the same professors and stuff like.
Oh yeah, they've worked with Wayne for sure.
Professor Wayne was one of my faculty mentors, as well as Professor Fatima El Tayeb.
Yeah. Small world. So Sandra, you asked the question about concepts or ideas. So can you restate it again for the video? Because I don't know if the chat's getting saved.
Yeah, no worries. So I joined in a little bit late, so I wasn't present for like the first portion of your talk, but I wanted to know like how you all collectively like come up with a concept or an idea for performance. What's your process look like? And I'm assuming that there's like food involved. So like what foods do you like to share collectively together?
Well, I'm going to go back to the garage band metaphor. You know, I feel like or maybe the karaoke band metaphor is a little bit better. It's kind of a little bit of, you know, what does this karaoke parlor offer? What do we want to be a trio together in? I think in the beginning when we were doing hauntings, we were enjoying each other's company. I mentioned this one kind of like foundational road trip to a fancy hotel. It was the Line Hotel in LA, and we just knew we wanted to get together and take advantage of the hotel and be in LA. And we took a lot of photos, which we called visitations, both in the hotel, but we also stalked fancy art openings. We felt like our presence would be interesting to see how you interacted with like a fancy white male art opening. I think it was Mike Kelly's like, you know, big show, and I can't remember where. And so that's kind of how we roll lately, because largely because of Thea's Alice show, we've been asked a little bit more to be in spaces, and we are thinking through opportunities specific to those spaces. And so for different shows, we're thinking about the location and the history. But, you know, the pandemic has changed things for us a little bit. And we are thinking a lot about mourning, a lot about global crises, a lot about non-human actors and agents. So I don't know if that answers your question. There's no formal process. It's kind of like, hey guys, what should we do?
It's true. We talk a lot though. Like we were asked to do this show that was based on like the written word and it was also like highly indigenous. And so we submitted 2 posters to be side by side. And one was like, you know, it just came out of this, I guess, like discussion and then shared aesthetics, you know, like we decided to take a line from the Prezi, am I going away? No. And then another line, reject that which makes you a monster and me a ghost. And we dated it and we said Super Futures Haunt Qollective from the Specularity. But we wrote it out like a rock show poster. And it was actually based on like a 1970s Talking Heads like street poster, you know? And then the other one was a picture that Ree had put together from our very first visitation, and I thought they worked really well together, you know. But yeah, a lot of when people ask us for work, that's a part of you know, they have a theme and an idea, and then we just sort of like, you know, talk about how that resonates with us.
I do think that we've had amazing conversations over Korean food, as was mentioned in the chat. Even when we were all not a collective, I think many a night spent at Ree's Irvine place, eating Korean barbecue with cucumbers and soju, which was, I think, a great starting point too. I think a lot of our work is really like desire based, and you know, we long to go and be in a fancy hotel. I think there's also a component of showing up. Like, we went to Oregon to be with Angie during a hard time, and we wanted to show up, and we made art. And then I think the third thing I'll say is that land is almost like our fourth collective member. I think wherever we do a visitation, the land is, we try to pay as much respect to it as possible, and I think it reveals interesting histories that are layered like a palimpsest. And I think, like, in our most recent thinking of what we might do for the show, like Camp Pendleton has its own histories of being a site of refugee settlement and also Indigenous land, and it just tells us things that we otherwise might not have seen, you know, on first glance. But it is like another avatar that we contend with.
I will add that, kind of piggybacking on Sam Jung's comment about land, that we do a lot of research. And so we have a project we're working on for Thea, actually, on beavers. And it is like, you know how you follow a rabbit down a rabbit hole? We're following a beaver down a beaver tunnel. I don't know what the equivalent is. And just the research process is really fun for us. So we meet weekly on Google Hangouts. And sometimes we're talking about art, sometimes we're talking about Tinder, sometimes we're talking about TV shows, you know. And then we always bring it back at least a little bit to the research topic at hand. But our research is like Googling and finding pop culture references and finding other articles and really going deep, so that that one beaver actually has become a very complicated topic for us. And it's, you know, it's full of inspiration and ideas. And that's kind of the fun of a collective, I think.
Oh, I see another question from Nina. One, why beavers? But then also, we heard about Agent O's conception as an avatar. Are you willing to share your process for conceiving your other avatars and the relationship among them within the specularity? Thanks, Nina. Answer the question.
I will say that why beavers, I think I'm being intentionally mysterious here, but beavers are the ultimate power bottoms. They terraform with their bottoms, and they're such affective and generous thinking that beavers afford. And they also have an interesting history of capture, resettlement, fucking shit up, and dispossession, all of that, which I think in the context of climate change and global disasters, it's an interesting relation to consider in our work.
I want to go back to food for a second. Food is hella important between the three of us, I will say. Like, we've shared a lot of meals. I've cooked for us, but so has like Wayne and Ree, and like between all of us, Sam, food matters. Like, I remember a lot of the meals that we share together too. Like, it is definitely a big part of the ceremony. And the ceremonial space that we do. As far as like my avatar, I think that it's, I mean, the fact that my avatar is Indigenous, like that and is a she, is because I'm a femme, you know, and that, you know, the relationship is, for me, is like, I do think in the traveling in between the specularity and the here, there's a lot of clutter for me, like that I think about, and different histories. But I will say that, like, Lady Howe and I are related, and I'm not sure exactly. And I'm not necessarily related to these people, or they're not people, these avatars, but I am definitely like in some kind of freaking threesome with them, where we are related and committed to this journey. And it's weird. It can be really weird, because, you know, I remember talking to Christina, or Ree, when she was, you know, traveling to Korea and creating her grad school project, where, you know, Agent O was emerging. And I would say that I didn't understand it at all, but I was definitely in awe of, like, the witchiness and the weirdness and the ghostliness, and it just was something that really, like, resonated. So when I got a chance to have my own avatar, I was like, I want my own avatar. And but I think that we're always learning a little bit more about, I'm always learning, actually, in my relationship with these two, more about Lady Howe. Like, that whole piece that you saw with that performance, they dragged that out of me.
We have about 8 minutes left, and I do want to respect everyone's time. Thanks so much for everyone who's called in and come in, and you all too. I realized I forgot to ask a question that I meant to for this class, which is thinking about just moods, right? The different moods that you all play with in your work, and how humor at this moment, maybe you already touched on it, but I do kind of want to hammer that in, since now is so depressing, right? Like, this is a really deeply, right? You mentioned mourning and grief, right? Like, collectively, we are all grieving. And when you all come together, right, even if there is a external or internal feeling of grief, right, that isn't the only affect that comes out in your work, right? And I think there's something too, but it's neither is it like blindly like optimistic or hopeful, right? I think it's really complicated. And I guess my question is more around, like, why joy, why hope, why these other things, right? Why are they so necessary to exist in your work as much as, right, the anger, as much as the mourning, as much as the grief, right? Does that make sense? Now I sound like Sandra. Sandra would always say something in our grad seminar, and at the end would be like, does that make sense? And I'd be like, yes, but now I'm doing it. Anyways.
I think at the very kind of most basic level, I think we, without ever really agreeing or saying this explicitly, I think the three of us were sort of avoiding kind of damage-based art making. Not as like an ideological stance per se, but I think we also want joy and hope, and we want our imaginations, you know, art should be a place of imaginations that exceed the critique. I think we're all familiar with the critique. And so art is one of those few places where you can also let your imagination exceed that, and there are no rules, which is the fun, right? The world making. So I think that's part of it. And I think we also enjoy popular forms, whether it's K-dramas or sticker booths or, you know, fortune tellers. And so I think connected with that is a slightly absurd sense of humor, kind of like keeping the mood on your toes. I feel like once the mood is knowable or kind of immediately understandable, that's unfortunate. So it's fun for us to surprise ourselves from time to time. So we have pieces that feel very deeply spiritual and full of gravity. And then we have pieces like the video on the TV where, you know, it cracks us up every time because we're doing kind of like a ceremonial high five, you know?
Are there
Yeah,
any, oh, sorry, Sam.
I think the thing that I'll add to that is I think the legacies of violence and war and colonization that we are born from obviously have their own weighted histories of extreme loss. And I think it's a way of refusal for us to say that we are destined to be our violence or the damage or abuse that has been done to us, and that in making art that really encapsulates the full range of what it means to be us, and all the lows and highs, that we choose freedom and choice and more in the face of limits and continued oppression and a kind of drive to be small and to remain in your ghettoed place of existence. And so I think that for me is partly informed by like our relationships to each other, and also in my training as like a politicized healer. And I think as you'll see, like the gesture of the spiritual high five is present in a lot of our work, I think is because it comes up naturally, but also because there's a move towards connection, not only between us, but like our audience. And that relation, I feel like, is such a powerful way to refuse violence and demand more liberation.
Awesome.
Sorry, but isn't haunting in part like being, like haunting is keeping company, right? Haunting means you're not alone.
Oh,
So
no,
I'd like to add to the haunting. We often talk about how, you know, haunting is always presented, at least in Hollywood, as a very certain, you know, a very certain set of activities where they go to the site of violence and they stir shit up and make people uncomfortable. So we do that, but we also feel like our haunts have other things to do. Like they want to go window shopping or gossip, or, you know, and so that's one of the reasons why we make a point of portraying the specularity as that space of keeping company and cracking crude jokes and not just, you know, haunting oppressors.
Yeah, I hope that there's lots of dancing in the specularity, like in all of our revolutions. So it's 4:28. So are there any last questions from anybody? And I see Mary on the video. So hello, Mary. And hi to everyone else who called in to hear the convo. Any last questions for them?
I just have a quick question, hopefully that's like pretty quick. When you're doing the visitations, y'all are always kind of in your like avatars when you're doing them? Are you folks like always in the pictures when you're taking the visitations? And like, is it wildly different as far as like the energy is concerned when you're like in like an urban space versus like a rural space? Sorry, I know that was kind of a lot, and hopefully maybe we can answer it quickly, but it's a burning question.
In general, we are usually in the pictures. I think there are a few where not all three of us are in, or it's just one. And up until this point, we've always had our visors. We've talked about changing what that visor might be, but for now, it really works for us. And you know, we couldn't help but notice during the COVID-19, so many people are using Super Futures visors. So there's this new layer to the visor that really adds to kind of the visor, the use of the visor. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I will admit I definitely finally took off, because you gave me one from Daiso, and I have kept it like wrapped on a shelf. But for sure, on one of my grocery trips, I'm like, I'm not going to Grocery Outlet today unless I got this on with the mask. So thank you for that additional layer of protection that I have now put back on the bookshelf behind me. So thank you so much to Angie, Ree, and Sam for talking to the class, and this will be taped, so I will respond back to folks and send it out on Canvas and through email for folks. There's lots of folks who aren't able to make it today, so we'll have the archive. And yeah, it was nice seeing you all, including the other folks on video too. So thank you.
Thanks, Thea, for organizing.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now in that awkward Zoom way. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Miss you.